Welcome to the Next Level Podcast, powered by San Manuel, a series connecting you with the best minds in casino, hospitality, tribal government, and beyond. Enjoy the show.
Erik Moses, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Enjoying some cooler than normal temperatures here in the Valley. So just happy it's under 100 degrees.
Oh, man. Tell me about it. I actually grew up in Arizona, lived there for over 30 years. So I know that pain, and Southern California, it's beautiful here too. So good for you on a nice Friday evening or Friday afternoon. So Erik, I want to start with thanking you, as the CEO and executive director at Fiesta Bowl. I know you wear a lot of hats, you have a lot of responsibility, but I was really looking forward to chatting with you today because it's perfect. Your background, I was thinking about the word cloud. I did a little bit of just some brief research. Some themes I saw were development, creation, law, sports, entertainment, partnerships, innovator. So I'm really excited to chop it up with you today about your career, your insights. But to start, if you wouldn't mind connecting the dots for the audience, we always like to start with the origin story. So from your own words, kind of your story of your early upbringing, maybe some key lessons from that time period, and then ultimately the path that led you to what you do today, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in central New Jersey, so I'm an East Coast guy, which is why I'm a little more sensitive to the heat here in Arizona than I might otherwise be, but adjusting as quickly as I can. I was a kid who always enjoyed sports. I enjoyed playing sports. I was not physically gifted or athletically gifted, and so I enjoyed playing them. But as I became a teenager, and a young adult, I was really more drawn to the business of sports and seeking to understand how deals happen. Michael Jordan was my all-time favorite player, and wanting to understand, all right, Michael is clearly the best player in the NBA. Why is he not the highest paid player? What is the collective bargaining agreement between the NBA and the Players Association? What does it say about this? How does it set up a framework for compensation for the league's players? How does he make so much money off the court? What does that Gatorade commercial pay him? What are the relationships with Wheaties and Nike? How are those done? So the business of sports and how athletes, how teams, organizations, governing bodies made their money from a commercial standpoint was always really, really interesting to me. So I had the good fortune of going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, was Michael Jordan's school as well, and Lawrence Taylor and many others. And so went to school with a lot of people, friends who had the opportunity to leverage their unique athletic gifts and skills to make money for themselves and for their families. And so when I was ready to graduate from Carolina, I knew I was going to law school. I have lots of lawyers in my family. As a young person, I thought, well, I'm a logical thinker. I can be fairly persuasive from time to time. What are those limited skills kind of link up with? And law was the thing that I decided to pursue. And I thought going to law school, I ended up going 8 miles down the road to Duke University School of Law. I thought, look, I want to protect my friends from unscrupulous agents and lawyers and accountants and managers and other people who would have them squander this unique opportunity to make really big money, kind of generational money for many of them. And I wanted to protect them from that. And so I had the great fortune of my first year of law school sitting in on the interviews of player agents by Grant Hill, one of the NBA's best, who was also a senior at Duke my first year of law school. And that was an eye-opening experience. And so what it taught me was, Grant was and is a singular kind of person, and certainly a singular kind of athlete who really didn't even need an agent in order to pursue his career, given, his dad, Calvin Hill, played for the Cowboys, went to Yale. His mom was roommates with Hillary Clinton in college and had a very successful business and was an entrepreneur. And they were very connected people, very intelligent people. He'd have been fine without one. There are very few Grant Hills out there, right, who are looking to go into that. And so I learned that I didn't want to chase 20 and 21-year-old kids around the country to get them to sign with me so that I could pay back my law school loans. So I didn't pursue being a player agent, but did want to be involved in entertainment broadly defined, and sports being a vertical under entertainment. And so I started my career in private law practice and worked for a company whose clients were large commercial broadcasters, Cox Communications, Comcast Network, and several others. And so as a baby lawyer, I was buying and selling TV and radio stations, and but always knowing I wanted to be professionally involved in sports. And I'll spare you the long story, but eventually my big break, if you will, to get into sports was becoming the sports commissioner and the CEO of the Sports Entertainment Commission in Washington, D.C., at the time that we were negotiating with Major League Baseball to bring what is now the Washington Nationals to D.C. and build them a publicly funded stadium. And so that's kind of how I got started back in 2008. And since then have had the really good fortune to land in some really interesting places in the sports entertainment world.
There's a lot there, and I know there's a lot more to that story as far as within your career. But I guess going back to my word cloud, what I'd be curious to know is, from as early as you can remember, your upbringing, growing up in the East Coast, you mentioned the education, law, Duke, but I guess what's the one word, if you had to narrow in on it, that has been paramount to your success, that maybe was a foundation early that still serves you today?
Integrity. I'm a big believer in relationships. My personal and professional life have benefited greatly from some fantastic relationships. Many of them have started off, professional and have become personal in nature as well. And so I think the way that we are able to come together with people in meaningful relationships is through trust. And you can't get to trust if you don't operate with integrity. And so whether that's in what you do from a business standpoint, and whether people can trust your word, that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, that you're going to abide by the contracts that you enter into, that you're going to be a man or woman of your word, that's all about integrity. And I think that's the foundation for building successful relationships. And that's the way that I seek to live my life, both personally and in particular in my professional life.
I love that. And that trust and that integrity that you're speaking to, were you fortunate enough to, I'm sure there are many, but early in your career is obviously, you're well established now, but was there someone who was a mentor? You can mention them if you want or not, but I guess, was there someone who really helped you kind of grill that sense of trust and integrity and why that's important?
Yeah, I was fortunate to have great role models in my parents and frankly, even my extended family. Education was something in our family that was very critically important. We were expected to go to college and certainly expected in some ways to pursue terminal degrees and advanced degrees. And both my sister and I both did that, with her with an MBA and me with a JD. My first job out of law school was with a law firm in Washington, D.C., and I was really blessed to fall into the employ of a junior and senior partner who worked together in tandem with some of our larger clients, and they needed an associate, to do some of the grunt work and to help them because they were super busy at the time. And I was fortunate enough that my reputation and the work that I had been doing as a young associate caught their eye, and they brought me on as part of that team. And so Michael Basile, who's heard me tell this story many times, was the junior partner, who was such a great technical lawyer. And I remember him taking me under his wing. We shared a secretary at that time, and he taught me the ropes. He taught me how to be a lawyer. He taught me how to do deals. He taught me how to analyze and draft contracts. And I remember, and I'll try to keep the story short, but I remember we were working on a transaction. I think we were buying a couple of radio stations for one of our bigger clients. And let's just say this was a Tuesday, and something came up, and it looked like our closing that was supposed to occur, where we closed and sealed the deal and signed all the documents, was supposed to occur on Friday. And something came up, and it came to our attention that we wouldn't be able to do that. This hurdle couldn't be crossed, and we wouldn't be able to get that done. And so I had a colleague in our tax department who had to provide some documents to me in order to help with the closing, to facilitate that. And I told her, once this thing came up, hey, don't worry about it. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to close. So, no rush. I'll let you know when we're moving forward. And, as luck would have it, whatever that obstacle was that was there before ended up going away. And so now I'm unprepared to close the deal because I don't have her part and we're not ready. And I remember being so afraid because this was probably either my first or second year at the firm. I think it was my first year. And going into Michael's office and having to tell him that I was unprepared to close the deal, and having him tell me, when you're working on a deal for us or for me, for any client, you are in charge of the deal. You're the CEO of that deal. And I don't care how many other colleagues or external parties have to contribute to getting that done. You're in charge of making certain that we have every piece that we need in order to get this done. And I've never forgotten that lesson. And it's been one that I've shared with folks on my teams over the years, because it really speaks to, one, always being prepared, two, understanding accountability yourself to those that you serve, but also keeping others accountable to the overall mission. And it's something I think that's just vitally important. And so Michael was one of my early mentors in my professional life, but I've been blessed to have mentors and sponsors all along the way, both professionally and certainly personally.
Yeah. And I think that's such a, I want to like double click into that topic a little bit, because I did want to pick your brain. Obviously, with your role as the CEO of Fiesta Bowl, you mentioned the unique background of deals and sports and entertainment. So you have a lot of deals and partnerships have been under your purview, or deals have been done under you. I guess broad question, take it where you want. What is the main, for our listeners out there who are trying to get better at partnerships, I guess in its simplest form, the art or the science or the 3 tips or whatever insight you want to provide, or words of truth around a good deal or a good partnership, what advice would you put out there on that end?
It's interesting. I mean, I don't know that I think there's any one way to do deals, and certainly no one way to do partnership. It depends on so many factors. What I will tell you is that I say to entities and individuals that I'm looking to partner with that I treat my partners the way I want them to treat me. And that is, I want partners that think about me when I'm not in the room. Mm. And by that, I mean, if, you and I are partners and we're working with the casino or what have you, or your gaming company or any of your other companies, and I'm in a meeting with a party that is either involved in something or interested in something that I know, Kyle, that you and your company are involved in, I'm connecting those dots internally in my head. And I'm thinking of, how do I get Kyle introduced to these guys to make certain that there's a conversation that can build value for each party. Not because you were there, but because I know what's important to you and your business, and I'm willing to represent that to the extent that it makes sense, when I have the opportunity. And so that's the kind of partner I am. That's the kind of friend that I am. And that's what I expect in those that I partner with. And so that's kind of, the way I'm always going to operate. Sometimes, we get partners who operate the same way, and other times we don't. But I'm going to be consistent as a partner in doing those kinds of things. So I think there's that. I think, again, going back to the theme we talked about a minute ago, trust. You have to trust your partners in order to move forward. And if you don't have trust, and you have that kind of spidey sense in the back of your head when you're discussing deal terms or thinking about the value exchange with a partner, most of the time those spidey senses are correct. That something is amiss there, and you should listen to your gut, as people say, about those things. You can never be over prepared. Right? Do your research. I tell young people that I speak to all the time, you have no reason to ever be underprepared for a meeting. There are too many resources at your fingertips to be able to glean information about people, companies, brands, institutions, markets, etc., for you to be underprepared. So, I think going in expecting to show up as a particular type of partner, understanding that there is a trust level and that you feel like you can trust those that you're doing business with, and do your research and be prepared so that hopefully there's a meeting of the minds, and there's a, if not equal exchange of value, at least the value that you're getting from the deal or the partnership is satisfactory from your side and hopefully for the other side.
So for you, you mentioned those spidey senses.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to know what are some potential, I won't call them red flags, yellow flags, or when your spidey senses go off, or your gut's telling you, there might be something not aligned here. Kind of for you, what are some of those early signs to look out for, especially when you're in the negotiation phase or you're just in the exploratory phase of any kind of partnership?
I think they're the kinds of things that we all recognize. I mean, there's an inconsistency in the way that people advance an argument or form and communicate their position. You know, today it's this way, tomorrow it's another way. The third day, I never said either of those things, the two previous days. So I think looking for those inconsistencies, one day, topic A is the most important thing to our company. The next day, topic B is the most important. I mean, those kinds of things. And again, those kind of get to transparency and truthfulness. People have different styles, but I look for enthusiasm. I want you to be excited about doing business with me and my company in the same way that I'm excited about doing business with you and your company. If it's a kind of thing where you're having to work too hard to convince somebody that it's a good thing or that there are some benefits to it, I have seen that waste a lot of time. And if your counterparts are not in agreement that this makes sense early on in the process, chances are you're not going to be able to make up for that enthusiasm deficit on your own. You can't love the deal enough for both of you that it gets done. They have to kind of maybe not meet you halfway, but there has to be some enthusiasm there, and they have to understand how this is going to be useful for them. So I think those are the kinds of things that I'm always on the lookout for.
Yeah, I wrote down so many good notes there. I love enthusiasm. I think there was a Kobe quote out there, like, if you're not obsessed, then I don't really want to partner with you. Like, maybe it's not that extreme, but to that point of enthusiasm, right? I think when you have two enthusiastic parties, that's where real magic happens, or real synergy. And then the other part of that too is just, I think part of it's that relationship building. You spoke about this earlier, like having, a partner's best interest, even when they're not in the room. And then another thing that's big for me too is, so often it's, what do you want? Which obviously anytime in a partnership, you should explore, align on what the vision is and how, both parties can help each other. But also just going back to the enthusiasm piece, just be able to use their expertise and maybe think in ways of providing value that company or brand or athlete or whatever it may be hasn't thought of, right? And I think those kind of things that you're hitting on really go a long way. And I guess I want to pivot a little bit to current day. So I'm going to ask a question, and then you could probably provide some more insight here. But if I had to ask you in its simplest form of my role today as CEO there at Fiesta Bowl, in its simplest form, my main duty is blank. How would you finish that sentence?
To provide the vision to rally our team in pursuit of the mission of this organization.
I love that. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think, we just finished talking about enthusiasm and passion. Work is hard. I mean, that's why they call it work, right? And so I think there needs to be some sort of passion behind wanting to do that work every day, especially when it's hard. If you aren't connected to the why of the organization, if it's not connected to your why, that can cause problems, and people tend to be uninterested in what they're doing, and that gets reflected in their performance. And so I think from my standpoint, I want to always make certain that everybody on my team understands kind of the North Star. Why are we doing what we're doing? What are we seeking to accomplish? What's our, around here we talk about our common purpose, to deliver world-class hospitality and experiences to all of our constituents and stakeholders. What are we rallying about in order to get things done? And oftentimes we've got to go around. I'm not naturally kind of a rah-rah guy, but when I'm talking about things that I care a great deal about, which is every job that I've ever done, hopefully people feel that passion. Hopefully they feel it when in the recruitment stage, when I'm working to get them on the team, and they feel it when I'm trying to say, hey, we got to go take that hill, and I need your help, and I need your wisdom, and I need your hard work in order to do that. And so the vision should be the thing that helps to help people with that enthusiasm and with that passion, and reconnecting what they're doing to that vision is vitally important. And then from there, if they understand the vision and kind of how we're trying to do what we're doing, where we're going, why we're doing that, and the mission really provides kind of the why. I mean, our why is we want to be responsible for driving positive economic impact for the state of Arizona and delivering charitable resources and impactful community engagement, across the state, particularly focused in areas of youth, sports, and education. And so those are things that people can get behind and feel really good about. And I think it's my job to make certain that we don't get so distracted by any one particular thing, activity, course of action, issue, dispute, that we lose track of the vision and the mission.
And when you spoke of that, I heard this quote the other day. I want to get your take on it, whether you agree or maybe you slightly push back. And it was culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Every day.
So I'm curious to know if you agree, and if so, why that is. Because obviously a lot of leaders and a lot of people come on this platform talk about how you need to have a strategy, a vision of where you're going. But it's interesting, when you weigh it against culture, how if the culture is right in that quote, it eats strategy for breakfast. So just curious to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, I agree 100%, because the culture is a thing that when you strip everything else away, the specific tasks, the specific work streams, even when the people change, right? The culture should be the thing that binds everybody together. It should be the connective tissue that allows you to pursue those goals and ambitions as a group in a way that helps to ensure your success. We know that in running organizations, people move on, especially now. People are, employees and are more mobile, I think, now than probably any other time in our country's history. And so, as leaders, we have to be prepared for that movement. We have to be prepared to replace people. Strategies change because of external factors. You have to pivot and figure out, all right, well, our mission is still the same. Our values are still the same, but now, the end point or the goal is a bit different. How do we do that? We've got to change our strategy. Well, the change in strategy should still be able to rely on the culture, the effort that people are going to give, the values that they have, and how they pursue those values and how they give that effort. And so I think it is the safety net for all good organizations, and I think it's the compass, if you will, for how you get to where you're going.
Love it. Agree with you 100%. On that note too, I was curious to know, because I wrote down on here, I think this is off your LinkedIn, I launch, develop, and create. Now, I'm sure intentionally you wrote that as the first part of your description. And with your background, that's clear. My question, though, is with all the things you've been part of with organizations and launching, developing, creating these, these hospitality, these best-in-class experiences and partnerships and everything that you do, what are some of the lessons you've learned? And I'll add this additional context. I think you spent some time at the XFL as well.
Yeah, I was a team president in the XFL for about a year. It was one of my favorite jobs before this one. And then a global pandemic kind of snuffed that out.
Right. So I wanted to add that additional context too, because I think your perspective is great on this, right? Because I bet you've had some major successes, and XFL is probably a success. I'm sure you could speak to that. But I don't think anybody had, obviously, the pandemic on their bingo card, right? So to put that amount of work as the president and everything that happened there. So take this question if you want, but when it comes to launching, developing, and creating, what are the lessons that you've learned along the way?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest lessons is patience, and that's a life lesson. I tell people that I've had some really great opportunities professionally. Um, and the thing I think I'm most thankful for is when they came into my life. I think if I had gotten the XFL team president opportunity 10 years earlier in my life, I might not have been ready for it, in the sense that you're younger in your career and you're kind of type A. You think you want to come in and put your imprint on things and do things your way, kind of my way or the highway. Maybe we're encouraged to make, internally encouraged to make more brash decisions and not really as collaborative as we could be, because we think, well, I got to this point, this rarefied air, somebody put me in charge and I got to show that I'm in charge. Whereas I've learned, over a career that's had ups and downs, that other people have things to contribute. Other people, I tell my team all the time, I'm going to have a perspective on everything. And most of the time I'm going to think that perspective is correct, but I'm open enough to listen to other perspectives, and not only to listen, but to solicit those other perspectives from my teammates, because I know that what I really want at the end of the day is for the best ideas to win and for us to be able to be successful. And so I think what I've learned is to be patient, is to be as collaborative as you can. I learned early in my career to base my opinions, especially on people, on my own interactions with those people and not what others have told me. When I first got to my law firm, I remember meeting with some senior associates and them telling me which partners I should avoid and look out for, or which ones were better to associates or what have you. And there was one in particular that they said, this guy's horrible to work for, blah, blah, blah. They thought he was borderline racist, whatever, all of these things. And so I'm wet behind the ears. I'm brand new. These folks have been in this law firm. They know it. Let me just see. But I didn't put my guard up around him, and I didn't just assume that what they were saying was going to be my experience. And that guy ended up being the first person, certainly the first partner at the law firm, to tell me I was a great writer. He was someone I worked with closely throughout my time at the firm and was always great to me. And when I saw him after I left the firm, again, always just fantastic. And so I share that story because I think we have to make up our own minds about individuals. We all bring certain baggage, if you will, of our personalities and our experiences to our interactions with other people. And so every interaction, every relationship is different in some ways. In the same way that, I'm a parent, I have two sons. My relationship with each of them is different independently. And so those are a couple of the things that I learned. I think while being patient, I would say you still need to be decisive, right? You're in leadership positions to make decisions, not to kick the can down the road. And so if you have been open to input and feedback by others, especially others who maybe have been in an organization longer than you or in the space longer than you, and you've been willing to listen and distill that information based on your own experiences and what you see in your vantage point. If you've tried to, rally support once you've decided the direction you want to go in, and you've thought about bringing people together to help kind of grease the skids to get those new things done. I always preach self-awareness, right? Be willing to, as I say to my team every time I speak in public or even in a staff meeting, I turn to my chief of staff and go, how was that? How did that land? How did you hear that? What could I do better to ensure that I'm communicating as clearly and as effectively as possible? So I think those are the things that I've learned. And especially when you're creating and launching things, easier to get there with partnership, man. Easier to get there with everybody in the boat, rowing in the same direction. And that requires people to feel safe and to feel like they are seen and heard, and that their input and their suggestions and their feedback is going to be certainly considered, if not also acted on. And so those would be, I think, some of the key learnings that I've had.
Yeah. There's so many things that I wrote down there. I think the quote goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Right.
Absolutely.
I think absolutely. I think especially for creatives, sometimes the natural default is, I'll just do it myself, or I'll just, a small group of people. But you learn over time, sure, you can get it done, but you can go a lot further if you get others on board. To your point, partners too, that could even take you to that next level.
Well, and especially type A personalities, right?
Yeah.
Like you think, well, it's going to take me more time to explain to somebody what I want. I'll just go and do it myself. Well, what you're setting yourself up for when you do that is always having to do that. Because if your teammates don't learn, even if that learning is learning the way that you want things done, or the level that you expect things to be done, then when the next time comes for them to prove themselves and to help out on a project, they're in no better position the second time than they were the first time, because you pushed them aside and did it yourself, right? And so part of the thing that can be really difficult for leaders is giving our teammates enough space and latitude to be able to learn and grow. And sometimes that learning happens through failure. Sometimes they have to fail and kind of, bump their heads, as we say, or stub their toes, to see that what you were telling them from the beginning is worthwhile and something they should pay attention to. Like most of us when we were kids, our parents tell us stuff and we dismiss it because what do they know? And then we learn the hard way. And those are the lessons that stick with you.
Yeah, 100%. We actually had a leader the other day at one of our group meetings. There was just a graphic for our manager group, and the graphic was about creative. And the question was, how do you define creative? And a lot of people said different things. And one of our leaders said, if you think about creative, he's like, what's actually in the word? And he's like, create, right? And I think it kind of speaks what you're speaking to, which is a lot of times on the surface, you're not going to have the perfect answer, or, maybe an idea at first pass is not going to fly with flying colors. But I think if you continue to create, to put effort out there into the world, eventually, something hits, but you have to be able to put that work out there. And another thing I wanted to go back to, which something you said, you talked about making decisions. I found, like, for this platform, these are people who, want to take their career to the next level. I find that the more you grow in your career, I've even had this struggle, the more that you take on responsibility wise, especially when you get a new role, you want to get every decision right? Like, you're trying your best to make the best, most informed decision. But then again, to your point, sometimes you're sitting on it too long. Sometimes, you're wasting RPMs in your head. Sometimes that, even though you're trying to have the best intention, by waiting to make a decision, right, you're leaving people in uncertainty. So curious to know from you, with the lessons you've learned, how have you approached decision making, and what's the advice you give to people, as they scale their career, as it relates to making decisions with kind of two opposite positions pulling? One is, you obviously want to be informed, data, make the best decision possible, but also at the same sense, you can't be driving yourself crazy on decisions, right? Like what advice do you give to people as they scale their career?
That's a fantastic question. So you have to have a long memory, because you want to learn the lessons from 5 years ago and 10 years ago, but a short memory, because you have to let the failures and the ones that you got wrong kind of slide off you so you can move on to the next one, right? And so I tell my teammates all the time, I think what I do for them and the way that I evaluate them is the way that I want to be evaluated, on efforts and outcomes, not just outcomes, because none of us are perfect and none of us are going to make the right decision every time, especially when we think about things like hiring. Like, how hard hiring is, and to get the right person in the right place. And maybe they look great on paper and they've got the experience and the skill set and all that, but they're not a good cultural fit. They don't get along with their teammates. They're not inspiring, or they start a lot of projects but don't finish anything. I mean, whatever it may be, we're going to get some things wrong. What did we learn? How do we apply that in the next situation? And let's move on to the next. We can't sit and stew and look at and beat ourselves up over the ones that we get wrong, because the nature of a leader is to continue to make decisions. And so if you get stopped and you're stuck, killing yourself over the one that you got wrong, you can't get to the next one. And that's what we're expected to do. So I try to learn with each experience, especially each failure. But, I'm one of these guys who feels like, never let them see you sweat. I have challenges and have had challenges in all of my particular positions. But what I want to communicate and what I want to exemplify for my teammates is calm, is confidence. I like to say an abiding confidence with a good amount of humility that goes with it, right? And so we can be confident in our opinions and our perspectives and our skill sets and our abilities and all of that, but we can also be humble about that and humble enough to understand that we don't know everything. And so that's essentially kind of how I viewed it. I'm a decisive person. I'm going to take in information, but I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to make a decision that I'm willing to live with, good or bad, right? And I think that's the part we have to do. Never shift the blame. We're leaders, right? We're expected to make the tough decisions. And if people who are employing you or who are empowering you to make those decisions think that you're going to get every single one of them right and that all of them are going to be perfect, then you're in an unrealistic situation.
Yeah, and I love what you're speaking to. Like, I think, two things could be true at the same time. Like you should, don't sweat it. Don't beat yourself up, be confident. But I love that you also added, you need to have a touch of humility, right? So if a team member comes, hey, Erik, I'm just curious, that on that decision, you can have that conversation and be approachable and, and kind of, they can work together. You've mentioned it a little bit as we've talked, but I kind of wanted to ask about keys to building a successful team, because you have a unique background, right? You've spent time with athletes. You talk about early on, you liked playing sports. So you've seen at the highest levels with athletes, but then also obviously in the business sides and the teams that you've led. I guess high level nuggets out there, but what are the keys to building a successful team, no matter what your endeavor is?
I think you have to have certainly an understanding, again, kind of going back to the vision and the mission of the organization, so that you can identify the right pieces to put in the right places. As people say, you got to get the right people in the right seats on the bus. And I think, understanding your mission, understanding the vision for how the organization wants to pursue that mission is critically important. I think, especially nowadays, being interested in and showing interest in people other than for the 12 to 14 or 16 hours a day they're going to spend working for your organization or for you is important. We're three-dimensional human beings. And I think coming out of COVID, mental and emotional well-being became even more of a focal point. And we have to be able to support each other. People do their best work when they feel safe, right? And our job as leaders, I think, is to make people feel safe. That doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want or not do whatever you want and you're going to be all right. No, but it does mean that I've got your back. I'm going to support you. I'm going to ask for the things that you think you need to be supported to get done what I've asked you to do. And then I want to put you in a position where you're able to bring your best every day. And that's really important. And so be willing to ask the hard questions of yourself and of the people that you're seeking to hire and to put on your team. Spend time thinking about, and there are tools out there. We use some now to figure out kind of these personality tests to figure out how those pieces fit together, right? Because if you've got two really creative people working together, they may be great about ideating and sitting in a room and coming up with 1,000 ideas every day. Who's going to go execute, right? Like, how do we build our teams to make certain that the pieces fit together in a way that allows us to accomplish our goals? And then I think you can never, I always tell my team, like, I'd rather you over communicate than under communicate. I'd rather you tell me too much and I have to tell you, hey, I don't need that level of detail, or you don't need to seek permission for that, than not. They get sick of me saying this around here, but left hands and right hands have to know what each other are doing so they can come together. And when that happens, the other saying that I'm sure they hate to hear me say is, we make 2 + 2 = 5, right? Because that's what we're seeking to do. But it requires that level of communication and understanding. with each other, because there are very few things around here, certainly in organizations like ours, that don't require multiple people and multiple departments to come together to make those things successful.
Yeah. Communication is so key. And I think, I've gotten a sense from you during this conversation. You also got to set the table, right? Like, even is advice to people out there is they start to, they're like, why do I public speak? Why do I have to lead a group? Because you have to, because no one's ever going to say, I don't understand. Few do.
Yep.
But like beginning with the why that you spoke about earlier, the vision, and as I call it, setting the table, whether you think it's necessary or not, it is necessary, right? So everybody knows, and that's where you get that 2 + 2 = 5. And I kind of want to talk about that self-awareness you spoke about, because you mentioned the personality test that you all have done. You said that was pretty key as far as an insight for helping leaders. So for you, what have you discovered about yourself as far as your awareness? Like, have you done the DISC profile, or like, what is the insight that you've learned from other people of like, I'm really great at this, but my blind spots are this? Kind of, what has been your self-awareness unlock as you've advanced through your career?
So it's going to sound bad, but so we do this test called Know Your Talents, and it seeks to tell you things about how you show up in the workplace, how you show up naturally, and then what you do when you're kind of on, right, and how you have to do that. When I looked at mine, and my chief of staff and others can tell you this, I mean, I felt like it was right on with who I am, that, I lead with decisiveness. I'm going to make decisions. I'm going to kind of have the energy to kind of get us involved to do things. And so I say it's going to sound bad because I think I know who I am, right? And I'm confident in what I bring to the table. I'm confident in the things that I'm good at. I'm also confident that I have a real good understanding of kind of where my deficiencies are, right? I will freely admit I'm not the most organized person in the world, right? Because it's weird, right? Because I started off as an attorney, and very organized and disciplined around doing things. But then as I've moved to the business side, I engage the creative part of my brain and my personality way more now, right? And I've said to people, if people always do these interviews and what's your superpower or what have you, if I have one, it is seeing the connection between ideas and concepts and people and organizations in ways that are more obvious to me than they are to other people. And so I can see that this thing we're doing over here would create great value if we connected it to this thing or this company or this person or this activity over here. And oftentimes that, again, seems so obvious to me, but when I'll explain that to people, they go, oh, I never thought about that, right? And so leaning into that and also being able to share with your teammates how you learn what that superpower is. So I tell my folks all the time, I'm not trying to micromanage you, but for me to give you my best to help to make that 2 + 2 = 5, it requires I get a lot of information. Like, I need to know what's going on, because those connections that I can see that others don't see as clearly require information. I gotta get that in. And so I think that helps. Again, going back to communication, as we both said, right? That helps when you're telling people, well, why are you asking me all these detailed questions about this project that I'm leading? Well, I'm asking you because you may give me something that triggers a thought from a conversation I had 3 weeks ago with a potential sponsor that you don't know anything about. But because now I better understand your project, I can connect the dots on those two things and try to be in a position to help your project.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think self-awareness is so key. And also not beating yourself up on, maybe your potential blind spot, but just recognizing what those are and then be able to adjust accordingly, right? Be able to I kind of struggle with the same thing. So like, I really love to have really detailed people around me, right, who are very organized, right? And same thing too. Like I call it the billboard effect. So I feel like I'm really good at the headline and like the imagery and like the bigger picture. But where I could possibly mess up is if it's just me, those little fine print items, right? So like having a full team, when we go back to building a successful team, I think self-awareness for everybody, right? And then understanding where your short spots are. And, I think that's how you build a successful team. I want to jump to a segment here, Eric, that we call the bigger picture. So what I do is I show a quote, I show a picture, and we just kind of riff on it. So the picture I have here is from Duke Law. And you mentioned your time at Duke. And the quote you have here is, I enjoy building teams and organizations and infusing them with a culture of high performance and teamwork that's prepared to do ambitious things. So I guess to put a final period on this conversation that we're having here, I guess, when it comes to, you mentioned it a little bit, but I guess if you're building a team, we've talked a little bit about the team culture, but double clicking on this quote a little bit, and this is going to be valuable for people listening. When you're building a team and you're hiring new people, what are the types of things that you look for in the interview? Obviously, it's job dependent, but stripping all of that away. If you're trying to look for some hallmark characteristics of someone that wants to work with you, what are you looking for?
Passion. I mean, it's going back to what we talked about earlier in terms of that enthusiasm. It's passion. When I'm, and I especially experienced this in Nashville, where this picture was taken when I was running the Nashville Super Speedway. That track had been closed for 10 years. I had to come in a pretty short period of time, build the entire team, rebuild our brand, get out in the community and get us ready for Cup Series, NASCAR Cup Series weekend in less than a year. And so knowing that that's the ambitious thing that we are seeking to do, if you're not passionate about it, you have to know in pursuing ambitious goals, it's going to be hard. There are going to be bumps in the road. There are going to be failures. There are going to be times when you feel like you can't do it. There's no way it's going to be possible. So if people, aren't coming to that with a certain amount of passion for that mission, I don't know how it gets done. So that's kind of what I look for in people that I'm interviewing. Can you get jazzed about what we're going to do?
Yeah, passion's key. And, something I want to ask, and thank you for your time today, but we kind of went through it, but, your time there as the president of the XFL team, I think a lot of people can relate as, that the COVID was a challenging time. But for you, if I had to ask you, what was the main experience you took from that with your stint there as president of the XFL team? What was kind of the biggest lesson you learned from that time period?
That's interesting. Sometimes when it looks like there isn't a way, that there is. You can get things done. I remember our team, the DC Defenders, was having the first game of this new league. We were going to be on prime time the week after the Super Bowl on ABC, and we were starting the whole season for the league. And so there was, as you would imagine, quite a bit of pressure from the higher ups and my boss to sell the game out, right? And this is a brand new team in a brand new league. We had about a year, but frankly less than that, to introduce name, logos, colors, coaches, players, all that kind of stuff into an NFL town, right? Where the now Commanders, then Redskins were playing. And it was a couple weeks, maybe a month before the first game, and ticket sales were lagging. It was not going well. And I remember being on a phone call with my boss and some colleagues, and just remembering my stomach just dropping, because his thing to me was, you got to fix this. Like, you got to figure out how to do this. And rather than, fold up, you got to figure out, all right, how do we get this done? And, through some kind of back against the wall circumstances that required me to provide some feedback and some input, that essentially said, hey, I need more support, right? I need us to figure out a better way and a bigger microphone and megaphone to inform the public about who we are and what we're doing and why they should care, right? And so it ended up working out great. It was a fantastic opening game and crowd. And some of that had been done because I picked the right people early in my social media and marketing and communications team that helped us to figure out how to capture the imagination of a brand new fan base. And we rode that connection into kind of creating affinity for this brand new team and this brand new league. And we connected with those people in a really interesting way, and were able to tap into the passion that they had as football fans, many of whom have been disappointed in the NFL team that was in their city, and were looking for something different and looking for a way to be able to express their love and appreciation for that sport. And we provided that. And so, I think I learned that you can't assume that just the vice presidents and the EVPs and the higher ups are going to be the people who lead you to success. I mean, my social media guy was, I don't know, a couple years out of college, and he was a big part of that success and our being able to kind of get people's attention because of what we were posting on social media and creating an audience and then a fan base that then helped us to sell those tickets, helped us to sell the merchandise, helped us to be a successful team. And so, as I like to say, good ideas come from all corners of your organization. There's no exclusivity on good ideas. And if you position the vision, the mission, and you help with that passion and everybody kind of feels it, you will benefit from those good ideas. And we certainly did. So it's probably more than what you asked, but that's kind of what I learned, that there's a way even when it looks like there is no way. And you're going to get some good ideas from every part of your organization if you build it the right way.
There is no exclusivity on good ideas. I love that one. I'm going to use that one.
Please do. No attribution necessary.
I have a couple final questions here, Erik. Just thank you for the time. A little more quick in nature, but I guess, with your career, if I look out let's call it the next 10 years of your career, obviously within like the sports space, right? I just feel like there's been so much change of distribution partners and the way that, the monetization and the tourism and, the boom. But I guess the next 10 years for everything that you do, what gets you the most excited, right? Is like kind of what is the change that you see that's happening, if there is any? And two, kind of what gets you the most excited as you think about the next 10 years or so?
I get excited by using my intellect, personality, connectedness, network to really tackle difficult situations and circumstances. And when I entered into this part of the industry in college athletics, I mean, it is changing by the minute between, realignment of teams into new conferences and those conferences becoming essentially nationwide conferences, to name, image, and likeness opportunities that in some instances, many instances, have become pay for play for athletes. To the transfer portal, which, I'm a University of North Carolina grad. I like watching our guys play for several years for our various teams, men and women, and those folks may be changing over every year. I mean, all of it is kind of challenging what many of us as sports fans and college athletics fans have come to know and love. And so it's an interesting time to figure out how to navigate that as a player in that space, but not so central to the space that we're the decision makers on any of those topics that I just mentioned. And in fact, we have to respond to those things. And so I'm excited about how the leaders in this industry will come together to decide what the future of college athletics should look like, and what way that we can positively influence that, so that these young people who are now making money off of their talents, and I'm 100% for that. I think the talent should always get paid. And I think these young people, most of them have a very short period of time in which they can leverage those unique talents to make money. The vast majority of them will not play professionally in the NBA, NFL, WNBA, and, et cetera. And so, I'm excited about finding a new way for college athletes to function, and for college athletics to function, and to be a part of that longer term solution, and look back 10 years from now and go, yeah, we were in the thick of it. Like we were working through this thing with various partners and stakeholders, trying to figure out what it was going to look like so that, in this case of college football, this thing that's been around for over 100 years and super popular, continues to be that way, continues to drive affinity in small towns like Clemson, South Carolina, and in big places like Los Angeles, California, and Austin, Texas, and all over the country, to captivate the imagination of fans all over this country and increasingly all over the world.
Man, and we could do a whole part 2 on the transfer portal, the shakeup of the conferences. But we'll put that aside. There's just so much I would like to double click on that. But I get the sense of, with all this change, that you're just that type. When the big wave comes in, you're picking up that surfboard and you're going to ride it, you and your team, and not put our head in the sand and act like it's not coming. So a couple final questions. Advice to your 18-year-old self. So knowing what you know now, if you only had a minute, we did the time machine, and you could pop back into 18-year-old Erik, what would you tell that person?
Study harder. Stop blowing off tests to go to parties, and study harder. It'll make a few things easier later on in life.
Are you a book reader?
Not as much as I should be. Not as much as I should be.
Is there a quote that you like? Maybe not a favorite quote, but a quote that resonates with you.
From a book that I've read?
Doesn't have to be a book. It could be from anywhere. It could be from Michael Jordan. It could be from anywhere.
I'm going to mess it up, but Tom Ford has a quote about how being well dressed is a form of good manners. And I love that, because I'm someone who you may not be able to tell now, but who enjoys clothes and likes being well dressed. And I love the ethos of that comment. People would often say, because I'm in sports, and so we can be relatively, informal. And people would ask me, especially when I was in Nashville running my track, and it's June in Nashville, and it's 97 degrees with 100% humidity, and I'm walking around with a sport coat and a button-down shirt and slacks and dress shoes, and people are saying, "Why are you dressed like that?" It's because I respect you and this property and this enterprise that we're involved in enough to show you that respect through the way that I show up. And so I love his saying about, being well dressed is a form of good manners.
I love that. And I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just an old school basketball fan, but the coaches now, I was used to like Pat Riley and, the nice suits. And then now they're all just in their kind of polos and whatever, and their quarter sleeves. And I don't know.
Another good quote that you mentioned, basketball, that comes to mind is, and this is something that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about, patience and as you get older, learning certain things. But I think John Wooden used to say, "Be quick, but don't rush." And so if you think about the application of that and the things that you do, being quick means, you're decisive, you're moving with intentionality, but you're not rushing. Right? You're not forcing things in a timing and in a cadence that don't make sense for that situation. I think that's one of the all-time great quotes from one of the all-time great coaches.
Yeah. And also, even if you're not a book reader, his book is one of the most recommended ones. They're just such a great leader. A daily routine that has benefited you that you would recommend to others. So it could be morning, night, whatever, but maybe a routine that you have that's helped you that might be helpful to others.
So going back to knowing my own shortcomings, I mean, I'm not much of a routine guy, other than I got to have some coffee in the morning, because as I half jokingly say with my team, I'm much better caffeinated than I am not caffeinated. But I will say, since I moved to Arizona, the natural beauty of this place is something that is, and I hope will always be, really inspiring for me. So, when I'm able to get out and go hiking in the morning, and I can look down over the valley from, Pastawa Peak or the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, or one of the places that I end up hiking, and you just see the whole valley lay out in front of you, and you see, frankly, God's majesty presented in front of you, it's a great way to start the day. And I know on those days when I do that and I'm hiking, especially if I'm hiking with someone and we're having conversation, I feel like the synapses are firing more. You just feel more alive. And on those days, I really feel it like during the rest of my day. So it has not yet become a consistent routine, but I'm aspiring to that.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to that. Passport speak is beautiful. It's like one big stairmaster. And
Yeah.
but something too, I'm sure you can relate. I always feel that when you hike, it's almost similar to when we're talking about creating things. Sometimes when you have a big project or a big obstacle ahead, you look to the top of the mountain and you get overwhelmed and you're just like, oh my, same thing with hiking, right? Like I've found if it's a new mountain and I look to the top, I feel defeated. I doubt that I can do it. But if you just take it in chunks, one foot in front of the other, and then before you know it, you're at the top of that mountain.
Yep. As we say, you don't eat an elephant in one bite. It's bit by bit, one bite at a time.
100%. Erik, this has been awesome. Thank you for your time. I want to get you out on the final question we ask everybody. You've provided so much insight here, but if you were to strip all this down and say from Erik, hey, if you want to take your career to the next level, here's the 3 tips I'd provide. What would those 3 tips be for you?
Again, have an unshakable confidence with an abiding humility. Do your research, act with integrity, and be as self-aware as you can.
Love it. Erik, thank you for the time. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the beautiful weather there in Arizona, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime.
I appreciate you having me, man. This has been great.
Awesome. Have a good day.
You too.
Check out more episodes at thenextlevelcareers.com.